Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. I wanted to speak about how in this life we find our attention sailing over many sorts of reality. We find our attention moving through many ways that the world can be real. And so the reason the title is Sailing Over Oceans of Belief, I wanted to capture this notion that sometimes we may think that the experience of the moment is our life, but sometimes we're just sailing through it. We're moving through certain moments of existential design. When a person wonders about the nature of life and what it really means, they are in some sense actually looking at how their memory and imagination is classified. If you think your memory is a linear thing, if you think it's been like A, B, C, D, E, F, like literally a sort of like 1, 2, 3, like a linear sort of memory pattern, it's like we have linearized our memory and we think that's our consciousness. You see, the intelligence of the person is something where many things visit the person throughout the day. Many things come and go in your attention. We have quotes from certain enlightened people by the name of Sri Ramana Maharshi, where he says, "Let what comes come. Let what goes go. See what remains." So I want to kind of suggest in some sense that there is not only an atmosphere to the mind, there is also a sort of weather. And for me, the weather is different ideologically every day I wake up. Some days it is shining. It's as if the mind is silent. I go do the activities of the day and there's barely any thoughts. There's nothing. There's no story. There's no character. It's just moments of sight happening. And then there are moments where every moment of sight is echoing. It is branching out into various memories, right? Every word a person says, it's as if behind their eyes they're standing in many moments, not only in the present moment where the stimulus of the environment is influencing their response, but at the same time they're standing in their memories. When you see in movies you see a kind of person. In movies you see that kind of person who is afraid of heights and he has to climb some sort of kind of like pole that's acting as a bridge. He has to cross something that's very difficult. Once the person crosses it and then the person looks down and they have that fear of heights hit them, it's in that moment where you see, like usually in movies, you see that the person begins speaking to himself. You are, oh my god, the wind. Just a second. The wind is trying to push my attention. You see that person afraid of heights kind of looking down at the sight below him, and suddenly the person closes their eyes and starts talking to themselves. It's like, don't look down, don't look down, don't look down, until the person gets across. The reason is because when there is fear, that means confronting the present moment has, in some sense, it hasn't been efficient, it hasn't been successful. Sometimes when you can't handle something in one moment, you get pushed into past memories. If you pay attention, hope tends to come from past moments where there was a sort of intensity of life, as if the person did a bicycle kick on a football field and then there came another moment and he was wondering, can I do a bicycle kick another time? And then suddenly the person goes for it. You see, it has to do with the acknowledgement of what is in your awareness, what sort of designs and allowances for the movement of life are in your attention. I find personally that our ancestors built boats and they went over unknown surfaces to find new lands. And I personally, oh my god, this rain. This rain! Like, guys, I'm in my porch and I'm in like an area where the rain shouldn't technically be here. Okay, there we go. Okay, to continue. Our ancestors, they built a ship and they crossed unknown lands, unknown kind of territories and challenges. I find that our consciousness, our free will, is a sort of ship, a sort of kind of designed vehicle to move through the unconscious and unknown aspects of life. Pretty much we're sailing in an unknown universe with the little bit of free will that we have. Oh my god. My god, it's raining so much, you know, we might even get a shout out from Noah. But anyways, just a second, folks. I gotta wipe the raindrops from my computer keyboard. Just a second, folks. Okay, let's continue. Rabindranath Tagore, this Indian polymath, has this very incredible quote. He says, "You cannot cross the sea by merely staring at it." And what that implies on a metaphysical level is you cannot know the true nature of how this world is here, in some sense, by just conceptualizing it from a distance. But how do we really get close to any sort of truth in this reality, if there is some? If there is any. Well, the thing is, it has to include an aspect of the free will. The free will is the clue to the secrets of the universe. The fact that it is here, the fact that there is a sort of presence of intelligence that is aware of reality. Carl Jung has this quote. He says, "Unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate." Right? And that's kind of my attempt with the title and trying to tell the audience that in some sense we have to utilize the free will and what it brings to navigate in this unknown kind of reality. There's a thing called terra incognita. Terra incognita is a very kind of interesting phrase. It is in some sense the unexplored unknown. And the way our imagination works, our free will seems to have control immediately with the memory. So that means right now, how you know something, if somebody comes and asks you, "Who are you?" you will suddenly see various images of your lifetime and you will give some sort of response. Those images arise through the free will doing something. You see, if we were just sitting still and silent, there is, in some sense, there's no, like, think of it this way. Life is not a photograph. It's a dynamic, changing phenomenon. Because it's dynamic and it's changing, the exploration behind our eyes will include levels of change. Certain atmospheres, personally, I'm going to share some of my personal experiences. Certain atmospheres of thought I've gone, it's very interesting. When you really go attempt to make the unconscious conscious, you begin to see the dissolution of the conscious form. That means right now your free will, most people's free will, is oriented to a shape, as if there needs to be something here for you to be here. right? But when you go to look at the unconscious, it is kind of the breaking of the foundation. You're kind of looking at the pillars that keep your civilization, and you're beginning to realize these pillars, where they actually are placed, are internal, as if the roots of the known mind are unknown. If you treat your intelligence as a sort of cause, you will, in some sense, feel God is everywhere. If you treat your intelligence as some sort of effect, you will feel as if there is no God, there is just something here. You see, our interpretations are, I don't know how important we make it. For me, on some level, I respect language. It is the greatest technology our species has, in some sense, discovered. But at the same time, it is a loop. It is a program. And a program that is used for too long and doesn't get updated, it will not meet the circumstances of the individual. What that means is if your car has no gas, you cannot envision going forth. And in some sense, if your conscious free will does not attain a sort of natural conscious-oriented direction, many unconscious factors will move you. Now, this is an inevitability because our physical body is made of is in nature's laws. The laws of nature tap me on the shoulder as much as my imagination, and so we are kept by a certain law of forces. And when the person really explores the nature of their free will, they will come into a sort of identification with these laws. When you come into identification with these laws, it means that you have chosen as a being to define yourself by what is in front of your eyes. It is very hard. I feel it's rare. It's so rare that a person can identify themselves by the nature of how the space behind their eyes is here before they do anything. It is very rare. Because in a world of form, the creature of form will run after information as if it is trying to satisfy the hunger of eons. We are manifest creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. We have an entertainment industry that has, in some sense, provoked a sort of sci-fi, a sort of fantasy dimension. But this sci-fi and fantasy dimension do not contribute as much as discovering and exploring the nature of emptiness. And for me, I will tell you something. Many people nowadays, especially in secular societies, they devalue the philosopher. They feel it's meaningless to ask why, because nature is just obvious, you know? But the philosopher had a courage no human being in some sense had. And it wasn't just the philosopher, it were the poets and whatnot. Guys, just a second. Just hold on for a second. Okay. Um, Sorry about that. There was just this unavoidable phone call I had to take. The human being, because it has kind of understood that its knowledge is floating in the unknown, it has started to have a relationship with the unknown. At first, the relationship was not animated that much, as if the early creatures that we, in some sense, consider we have evolved from, they did not have a philosophy on life. They did not look at nature and see words and language, in some sense, as a sort of subtler skeleton for it. You see, it's as if they would see an object and they wouldn't call it a chair, as if the linguistic realm had not even opened up to the attention of the being. The subjective evolution had not even properly occurred. You see, the subjective evolution is the origin of the free will. Your physical body has had an objective evolution. Literally, objective forces have changed the way it appears. But your free will it's very unique because your DNA is the container of it. Your DNA is like a glass, and like whatever you filled from this waterfall, like imagine you take a cup under a waterfall, and however amount of water you take in, that is in some sense the attention of the lifetime. You know, right now I'm sitting here speaking about a sort of world I see, but at the same time I acknowledge that the world I see is the world I see, and this sense of I has to do with the immediacy of its existence in a moment. So the attributes of meaning, in some sense, are coming from an attributeless space of observance. When the person again, in some sense, initiates a sort of conscious exploration of the unconscious, this attempt of personalizing the unknown will lead to some sort of invisible other. What that means is when man came to see what truly was his imagination did not follow the laws of his memory. His imagination did not contain the world in the same way. Because if it did, it would not be imagination. And that is the danger of programs that have one sort of, it's as if the program is designed to have one objective, but in a changing objective world, how can it possibly be aware of all? So the way we see intelligent human beings and many human beings function is that they've concluded that it's a solo journey primarily. This solo journey, because it is such a firm conclusion, the person, even if they find themselves in a sort of collective efficient opportunity of their civilization, they will reject it. There is so many challenges and so many obstacles in this reality if the person wants to design something, because the world is changing. Me personally, I've had moments where I consider it was the voice of the logos, this inner guiding voice. You see, there is a sort of voice that appears in the attention of the being, which is pretty much thinking without your mouth open. That voice, I personally theorize that it's occurring from the slight vibrations of the voice box. But I've kind of spoken, like in many of these talks I give, for me, on one aspect of me is giving the talk, but another aspect of me is constantly, endlessly observing where are these words coming from? How is the mind containing it? What is the ambition? What is the relationship of emotion with the objective reality? What is the relationship of the conscious and unconscious mind? And for many years, I think it's been like close to 8 years, 6 years, where I have gone on this quest to see what is really here. And I have been humbled. When you try to put the world in a box, you eventually get rid of the box. The logos is a concept which the ancient Greeks acknowledged, and it was in some sense the divine will of the gods in some sense in the heart of man. It was as if the motive of evolution was the intention of a higher mind. So this logos was very unique. This logos met, like Socrates, Aristotle, many people, for many philosophers specifically, who, as they have gone into the exploration of how reality is empty, they have, on some sense, they have indirectly entered made the unconscious conscious. Rather, most people see something they don't have and they run after it like as if it's like they're hungry for something. You see, the philosopher was not hungry. You become a philosopher when you're no longer hungry for a certain outcome. Rather, you're just seeing things. You see things, see how they move, and then definitions arise automatically. For me, I was like, what is the point of words? When I went to school, I'm like, okay, the teacher's coming here writing these words, and I realized the words are images. And the images have to relate with the nature of how this world is here, So this logos, this inner guiding voice that in some sense guided all philosophers, it was some sort of kind of like mind of the planet moving all that was on the planet, some sort of field of intelligence. This inner guiding voice, I'll give you an example. For example, Socrates, he was summoned to court and by the old men of Athens, and he had enemies, and in some sense, the enemies take him to court, and he's in a kind of troubling situation where people feel he's spreading his own kind of divine agency propaganda or something, right? And so Socrates is there, and Socrates gives one of the most incredible speeches there, one of the most profound things, you know. Socrates looks at the old men of Athens and looks at the court as he is summoned to speak, and he says, I have not been spreading lies. He says, he tells the court something incredible. He says, I have enemies which are from now, and at the same time I have ancient enemies, as if he's saying he has enemies from other lifetimes that are combating him in this life. You know, some sort of unique notion like that. Anyways, what happens is he's challenged. Socrates is challenged to explain himself, and he suddenly reveals it all, that from the beginning of his life there has been something he's eventually called the inner oracle. It's like this kind of intuitive inner guidance of an authorization for the moment to continue. As if for him, his intuition arose, his collective intuition arose to him, the logos came to him as an inner oracle, you know, where suddenly out of nowhere knowing would be given to him, whether he should enter a moment or not. And he says his whole life he has trusted this inner oracle, and every place it has taken him, you know, where places where the inner oracle would tell him, no, Socrates, don't walk this way, or the places where the inner oracle would say, walk. And so when Socrates, he was saying to the men of the court, he's like, when I came into this court, the inner oracle did not stop me. And so it's as if Socrates was conscious of a higher dimension of living, where in some sense he was living for history. He was not living for himself. He was playing his part as an entity, rather than being entitled to what was the world in front of him. And so Socrates talks about the inner oracle, and unfortunately he does have a way out to get out of the situation, but he decides to take the poison, and he decides to leave the mortal realm. And there's this supreme painting, I don't know who the artist is, of this moment where Socrates takes poison, and this poison he takes is very strange. It's like this kind of unique poison. It's like his intuition is on another level, and he's even been known to say, for example, at the moment of death, the person gets when they're getting close to death, they get unbelievable kind of a sort of spiritual intuition, as if their mind has already left the body before the body has, so the body is in some sense in ultimate peace. The body is not fighting, it's the inevitability. The body is relaxed, as if you have put your phone away and are walking to on fields of, you know, divine grass. But anyways, so this inner guiding voice, this logos, okay, it came to Socrates as the inner oracle. It came to Friedrich Nietzsche, this German philosopher, as the daemon, you know, in DAMON. It came to different philosophers as different sort of entities, a relationship with the invisible other, because the invisible other was also the invisible aspects of the mind of the individual. Okay, you right now a certain amount of your intelligence is visible, you're conscious of it, like your body, you're like, okay, I can see my body's here, you know. But when you come to see your thoughts, you can only see the remnants of how they were here and left, as if you're seeing the footprints of thoughts. You're not seeing the actual thought. You know, the thought is not something physical which with objective eyes can be seen. It's a sort of how the attention has held on to something more than the objective. Honestly, there's so many other people. Okay, there's this story I've heard, which is an incredible story. It's about this French philosopher named René Descartes. And René Descartes, before he was who he really was, and before he made his incredible contributions, which today are kind of like he's in some sense the Cartesian plane we find in mathematics, the x-y axis, pretty much. That was the development of the René Descartes. And he was also an incredible philosopher, even reaching his philosophies to the point where he was seeing the dualism of the mind and the body, how the mind was in its own world and the body was in its own world, and the mind saw itself in the body, yet it never was. You know, and so his philosophies have also been a great contribution to Western society. But for example, René Descartes has this story where he's still a young guy, he's not who he is, and he's in a barracks, as if young men at the time, it was like they would join a sort of militaristic thing. It was like the fashion of the time, you see, like the popular thing people did. And so what happened is he was in this barracks, and one night as he sat in this barracks, he has a dream. And his dream is very unique. You can say sometimes the person is like in a Carl Jung way trying to make the unconscious conscious. you know, but there are moments where the unconscious makes itself conscious. Imagine suddenly it reaching getting a dream that has no relevance to your daily life. You know, that's a sort of kind of gift from the unconscious to you. Every day the person opens his eyes, the world is changing. Pay attention to its change, and you will see a sort of infinite magnificence in the background of intelligent movement. So Rene Descartes is in this barracks, and evidently this important man has a dream at that young age. Like, I think he's in his late 20s, you know? And so what happens is he has this dream, and in the dream an angel comes to him, and his mind was from an early age pondering deep notions. And so what happens is the angel comes to him in the dream. It's pretty much a dream. He has a dream. In the dream, the angel comes to him and says the next conquest of nature is through number. It is through number. And so for him, it's as if it's a sort of unique revelation of his unconscious mind to his conscious mind in his precision and attention to the numerical language that developed prior to all languages. Numerical language is very important because it has to do with the separation of forms. That means if we did not understand mathematical language, we would not be able to use our English language today. We would not have words having spaces in between them. So for example, his unconscious in some sense came to him as a sort of angelic image. And so this is the unique attempt. It's not the unique attempt. It's like either way, when you wonder about the unknown is personalized. You can choose it to see it in the context of God. So it's as if it's God's kind of, like some in the New Age community sees it as guardian angels or extraterrestrial like family members or something. You know, I was very fascinated when I saw that in the New Age community, because it's as if they have made their illusion in the most brilliant way. They have made a galactic personality, a sort of personality beyond the world, assisting them in the world they're in. So what I'm trying to say pretty much with these stories is that the unconscious communicates. For me personally, how all these talks kind of were inspired was through a unique sequencing of events. I find that till 2011, I was born in 91, and till 2011, I felt I was lost. I felt I was in some sort of karmic rejection from the world, as if everything I felt I did was being pushed back, was being denied. And so there was this sort of thing, and I remember I had a sort of sales job at the time. And I had this kind of like hidden ego, you know, the hidden huge ego. I felt the world had to listen to my mind, but not in a gracious way. In a sort of like I felt the expectations I had to be met. You know, I had not found my real self then, so I was kind of like trying to savagely be something. Anyways. Certain problems come, I go into nature, I sit down, and for the first time, I sit down on a rock in the middle of a river, and for the first time arises this question in my mind, who is looking through my eyes? As I ponder on this, I go on this quest of truly wondering what the hell are people saying about spirituality. So I started going on some sort of personal research quest of trying to see what is this? What is this notion of the soul? You know? And when I say I went for the notion of the soul, it was through a preferencelessness. Because the moment I realized I have no idea, like in 2011, it was a kind of moment where I say I was laughing and crying at the same time. What that means is you're crying because it took you so long to see it. You're laughing because you finally saw it. And I suddenly saw that I have no idea, and none of my thoughts, every thought I had on my mind was being observed by my mind, and how could that thought be it? And so immediately it was kind of very chaotic. All the beliefs I had, I looked at all my beliefs, and I was like kind of angrily looking at all the ideas I had kind of, in some sense, taken from this world to feel as if it's me. I let go of them instantly, and it was a sort of roar against the artificial in my experience. Now, what happened is in 2013, I believe it was, I get a dream. I have a dream where I feel like literally my consciousness took a shower. Like it was like something happened in that dream, and the dream was very unique. I've shared it in my early talks. I don't often talk about it because I only talk about it in certain unique contexts, especially when I speak about the pilots of consciousness. But anyways, I'll tell you what the dream was. That I had a dream where I'm seeing this giant triangular cave on this giant kind of what appears to be a stone wall in the middle of space. Suddenly, when I see this, I'm in this kind of semi-conscious mode where, as if like from the dream, from that imagery, I am suddenly in my bed, but my body is asleep. I've had many mornings where there's two explanations for it. Like when you sleep, your body puts this kind of chemical in your system that makes you, when you have a dream that you're running, you don't jump out of the bed. It kind of like makes the body inactive in some way, right? But sometimes the alertness and awareness of the person can awaken earlier. So pretty much I've had mornings where my mind's woke up earlier than my body. And usually people feel it's a sort of sleep paralysis, but that sort of sleep paralysis is something that fades. Like you just have to breathe through it. Whenever you're in some sort of sleep paralysis, the easy remedy is just breathing. When you can't move your body, you must breathe. Move your breath. It's so important to be conscious of that your breath is like your body. anyways, so in the dream, I see that imagery of that giant inverted triangular cave in space, and suddenly I'm in my bed in this semi-aware state where I can see the whole room, but my eyes is closed, but my attention is originating from where my head is, and then I hear a word. That was the most unique thing that had ever happened to me. That was the most unique thing that the unconscious had ever done. My unconscious. There was a word I had never heard, and when I heard the word, I instantly said it, and there was this kind of instantaneous projection. I didn't see like what happened, but in some sense, this is all you can consider a dream state still. What happened is I suddenly there's this the word was Lidah, Lidah, like I knew the exact spelling of it too. And when I said this in that kind of semi-sleep paralysis kind of state, as I'm like my attention's like awake in my bed, but my body's asleep, there's an instant projection. Literally, my attention jumps. It instantaneously jumps. There's no sight, nothing, and then I just see myself coming back to my bed, and I see the walls. I'll never forget it. It was like a kind of puzzle the universe gave me. I still wonder about it. It was as if there was this, what my ceiling was in a cubic ocean wave-like way moving as I saw, like as I was in my body. And so what I mean by like the story is not important, but what I'm trying to say there is that I say that word. There came unconscious communication, a sort of phenomena from the unconscious, and then the consciousness acknowledges it. You know, it's kind of like, imagine somebody tapping you on the shoulder and you're on the phone, and the person's like, sir, and you're like, leave me alone, man, I'm on the phone, you know, and suddenly that person's like, you're missing your bus, and then you suddenly realize the value of the acknowledgement of something that was coming to you from the unknown to recalibrate the knowledge. So anyways, it was very unique. That word, for a long time, I didn't know what it meant. Eventually, certain meanings came naturally. Something incredible happens when you stop looking for the future in the present moment. The future comes to you. So after that, eventually I went on this path where the logos, I began acknowledging, like I remember like a year later, I was just raking leaves in my backyard in the same house that I'm in now. And as I was raking these leaves, in some sense, uh, Yeah, as I was raking the leaves, it was a sunny day. I was at the corner of the house, and suddenly I remember one of the most strangest things happened. I began hearing lines of poetry in my mind, as if like suddenly lines of poetry that are coming, that the lines of poetry were so intense that I started crying, like tears were coming out of my eyes, out of thoughts that I had not thought of. Just it appeared out of nowhere, the line of poetry. And I remember I was raking leaves, crying on a sunny, hot day. Like it was weird. I was sweating and crying. But I'm telling you, it appeared. It's as if that's when I began to see my thoughts as natural beings. Every time my thoughts came to me, I treated them like as if a bird has landed right on the table where I'm giving a talk, for example. And so that's the thing. The whole point of this world, that it's like waves of data hit you, and a lot of phenomenology just occurs, and eventually who you are. It's as if your free will is not based on a solid image. You should, like all those people in that kind of law of attraction, the secrets, kind of that community where they're just stuck in saying affirmations. I mean, what other way to be more robotic? Affirmations are a kind of conscious way to be a robot. So Hafez is this person where he says, this poet where he says, the words you speak become the house you live in. That is true on some level, but the awareness to language dictates the experience. So your relationship with language must change first before your consciousness can, in some sense, free itself from any sort of belief engagement. Eventually, this sort of inner guiding voice, I began first, it was lines of poetry, then it became certain articles. I started endlessly writing articles for myself. And there would be moments where I would see my hand move faster than the idea, as if my hands were writing words that, in some sense, the word, the hand was moving faster than my mind. And this doesn't mean it's something else. We don't have to evoke the supernatural all the time. But in some sense, for me, I began establishing a relationship with how thoughts appeared in my experience. And that inner guiding voice, the logos, one of the first articles I wrote was that this article was in some sense a suggestion. It was telling me that don't get attached to the personality of the unconscious mind. When the unknown comes into communication with you, don't see a personality there. If you see a personality there, you have in some sense made yourself vulnerable for that phenomena or whatever happens to change your personality. When I say see, it's very important. Externally, you got to be flexible. You can't just be one type of person your whole life. It's impossible, by the way. But when it comes to meditative self-inquiry into the nature of the subjective realm, that's when the personality must be maintained. I tend to have a geometrical relationship when I explore the unknown, because I keep it on a level of design. When it's on a level of design, stories don't animate. You see, it's as if first existence is just design. Designs are here. Then these designs, based on their free will capacity, begin developing emotions. You don't understand. Your memories are not per se where you should, in some sense, get notions of the future from. Your memories are a sort of preservation of image. It's a sort of image preservation thing, as you're processing various forms of data in order for yourself to have a linear, in order for you to be an individual. When you look at the word individual, I playfully, poetically sometimes say in my talks, it's like in duality. So you got to be mindful of duality. So this inner guiding voice, its communication was in some sense, do not make the unconscious into a sort of divine personality. So because it's very important, the moment you make something more important than anything else, it will dictate your life. Everything will center around it. The person is imagine the person is an engineer. the person is studying to be an engineer, suddenly some sort of ideology comes to them, and rather than them continuing their life with the ideology, with the engineering, their life revolves around the idea that they have found to be more important. This is why they say love is blind, because the person sometimes when the person loves the other person, they totally forget themselves because their attention is on what is important to them. It's kind of like the person who's trying to save the world is actually trying to save themselves from how their mind is originating experience. Humanity must create a new relationship with the world, and this new relationship falls into a kind of view where knowledge, our educational systems, are kind of like our relationship with the visible. Okay, but the relationship with the invisible is the edge of the educational system. It is where language cannot hold the higher dimensions in a light we can see. So we sail over oceans of belief. We sail over various data and we pick and choose. And at the end of this life, we will see the beginning that has walked through it all. It's kind of a strange situation. It's as if we're objects that see themselves that are aware of themselves in a non-objective way. It's as if, like, you see water, for example, there's the substance can in some sense be in a solid state, liquid state, gas state. And for me, the objective material manifest reality, what is here and physical, you know, this is like on a solid state of the mind. And then thoughts are like in a liquid state of the mind where matter is more malleable and can move in various ways, but the metaphysical origin of the nature of the being is like gas. It's very hard to see gas. Do you see certain gases? It's as if it is in the way of it's like kind of like the character and the world in which the character is in, both in some sense evaporating. So there will come a time where your beliefs evaporate. This boat, this kind of ship of individuality we're on that's sailing over all this unknown data of the world, suddenly there will come a moment when the edge of the mind is witnessed. When you witness the edge of your mind, you're no longer a creature of thought. You have automatically somehow moved beyond the language threshold, and Mr.Within will commend you and say, just carry on. You know, keep calm and carry on into your unconscious. Consciously keep calm and carry on in the unconscious. Yeah. So what this means is that the memory is projecting many moments of life in one moment. Our memories are badass, you know. And so the person has to develop a relationship not with just the maintenance and awareness of their body, but with the maintenance and awareness of their mind, in which, similar to how if you never moved, we cannot know who you were. If you never said anything and never moved on this planet, nobody would see you. It's as if nobody imagined. It's as if there was never a movement, there was never a story, there was never a series of these sequences of decisions that would build and sculpt your character. But because the memory is here, it's implying that in one moment of life there is access to different times where the life was present. And once you truly reverse engineer to the bottom, to the origin, not to the like to the cause of your conscious memory, you will eventually have to reach a point where your free will has to equate itself as the unconscious, or it has to equate itself as non-existent. Either you're going to see behind your eyes your collective field of intelligence, or you're going to see nothing. You're going to be the nothing that never needed something. A sort of unconditional state, kind of like the space where existence moves, has no quality, has no attribute. I do something playful in these talks where I randomly open up, like sometimes I have this book in front of me. It's this book from, I guess, the Hare Krishna movement. And it's from this man named Shri Prabhupada. And he says life comes from life. That's the name of the book. And sometimes I just open random pages and see what's there. And I just share it in the talk. I don't know why, but I feel that's just... So the discussion begins like this. Pretty much Shri Prabhupada is this man who's condemning Darwin. So the question begins. There's this doctor named Dr. Singh who's asking Shri Prabhupada, this probably at the time like 70-year-old kind of like mystic who from India traveled on a cargo ship to come to America, like some next level story he has. But anyways. And the reason I'm reading this is not because I 100% agree with the eyes of another person. It's because I feel... Anyways, here, let's read it. It's on page 37. The title says Darwin Condemned. And so Dr. Singh is asking Shri Prabhupada. And Dr. Singh says, if a human being doesn't attain liberation, does he have to pass through all 8,400,000 species of life before again coming to the human form? Okay, Jesus. Okay, so there's this thing in sacred texts such as sacred Vedic texts such as the Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, the Upanishads, and other texts which I believe Srila Prabhupada is referring to here. Srila Prabhupada has this concept that there is actually 8,400,000 species, right? And in some sense there's we don't see that many on this planet, but in some sense he says there is, and all the different sorts of creatures that are alive, different sorts of species, And so they have this thing of kind of incarnation, and the person's lost in this wheel of this incarnation cycle, and they have to some sort of find liberation. Liberation is like the primary inspiration for metaphysical study in ancient Indian context, philosophies. Anyways, Sri Prabhupada is giving a response. So I'll read the whole thing again. Dr. Singh says, if a human being doesn't attain liberation, does he have to pass through all 8,400,000 species of life before again coming to the human form? Sri Prabhupada, no. Sri Prabhupada says no. Only in the lower forms of life does the living entity progress step by step according to the laws of nature. In the human form of life, he is endowed with developed consciousness. He has discretion. Therefore, if he is advanced in consciousness, he's not going to get the body of a dog or a cat. He will get another human body. He says, Sri Prabhupada continues, he says, the word yoga brasta refers to someone practicing yoga who somehow or other could not fully succeed. There's no question of evolution here. Here he is again awarded a human body. He does not get a cat's body or a dog's body. As with the apartments we were discussing, if you can pay more, you can get a nicer apartment. You do not have to come to the lower class apartment first. I'm going to read the whole thing, then I'll share my commentary on it. Dr. Singh says, what you have been saying completely contradicts Darwin's theory of evolution. Shri Prabhupada, Darwin is a rascal. What is his theory? We kick out Darwin's philosophy. The more we kick out Darwin's philosophy, the more we advance in spiritual consciousness. Damn, man, this guy's at a kind of subjective war with Darwin. Dr. Singh, many scientists doubt Darwin's theories. But Darwin's supporters say that life started from matter and evolved from unicellular organisms to multicellular organisms. They believe that higher species like animals and men did not exist at the beginning of creation. I don't know why I'm making Dr. Singh's voice like this, but yeah. Shri Prabhupada. Darwin and his followers are rascals. When he says rascals, I think of that movie. Anyways, Darwin and his followers are rascals. If originally there were no higher species, why do they exist now? Also, why do the lower species still exist? For example, at the present moment, we see both the intellectual person and the foolish ass. Why do both these entities exist simultaneously? Why hasn't the ass form evolved upward and disappeared? Why do we never see a monkey giving birth to a human? Okay, that's it. That perhaps can have an explanation, a secular explanation. But the Darwinist theory that human life began in such and such an era is nonsense. Bhagavad Gita says that you can directly transmigrate to any species of life you like, according to your efforts. Sometimes I travel to America, sometimes to Australia, and sometimes to Africa. The countries already exist. I am simply traveling through them. It is not that because I have come to America, I have created or become America. And there are many countries I have not yet seen. Does that mean they do not exist? The scientists who support Darwin are nonsensical. Bhagavad Gita clearly says that all the species exist simultaneously and that you can go to whichever species you like. You can even go up to the kingdom of God if you so desire. All this is declared in Bhagavad Gita by Lord Krishna. I'm going to continue reading, guys. I think the next page is actually interesting to share. If you don't want to listen to this, you can definitely tune out whenever you like. Sri Prabhupada is now speaking about evolution from human to dog. Oh my god. Sri Prabhupada says the so-called scientists are putting their faith in a fraudulent theory. Krishna says, I am the origin of everything. Krishna is life. Krishna is not a dead stone. Dr. Singh, so matter is caused by life? So matter is caused by life? Sri Prabhupada, yes. And matter grows upon life. My body grows upon me, the spirit soul. For example, I have put on this overcoat, which is made according to the size of my body, but I would be foolish if I thought I am this overcoat. Student. So there's a student there too, I guess, aside from Dr. Singh asking Shri Prabhupada. Student says, Shri Prabhupada, mineralogists have proven that mountains are growing by sedimentary activity. Is this growth due to the presence of the spirit soul? Shri Prabhupada, yes. Srimad Bhagavatam describes mountains as the bones of God, and the grass as the hair on his body. So in this sense, God has the biggest body. Dr. Singh, Shri Prabhupada, what is the difference between the transmigration of souls in animal bodies and the transmigration of human souls? Shri Prabhupada, animals transmigrate in only one direction, upward. But human beings can transmigrate to either a higher or a lower form of life. The body is awarded according to the living entity's desire. The lower animals have one kind of desire, but the human being has thousands and millions of desires. Animal desires as well as human desires. By nature's law, the lower species are coming up from animal forms to the higher human forms. But once you come to the human form, if you don't cultivate Krishna consciousness, you may return to the body of a cat or a dog. Okay, now the questions are leading to nirvana, the main, it's like the pie of heaven at the end of the tunnel. anyways, nirvana. So that's the topic. Dr. Singh, the scientists have no information that there's evolution up or down from the human platform. Sri Prabhupada, therefore I say they are rascals. They have no knowledge, yet they still claim to be scientists. Real science is in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, there's no way I could pronounce this, Yanti Deva Rata Deva Pitri Yanti Pitri Rata. I butchered that. Anyways, this means that whatever one worships in this life will determine the type of body he gets in his next life. But if one worships Krishna, he ends the process of transmigration entirely. Then he says something else. He says, Yam prapya na nivartante. That sounds Italian, but tad dhamma. He says, when one goes to that supreme abode of mind, it's as if Krishna is saying this in the Bhagavad Gita. When one goes to that supreme abode of mind, he never returns to this material world of birth and death. Promotion, this is now Prabhupada talking, he says promotion to the spiritual world is the ultimate perfection of human life. Read Bhagavad Gita, everything is there, but the scientists have no idea of this perfection. They do not even believe in the existence of a living entity apart from the gross body. Dr. Singh, they do not speak of the living entity, they speak of only bodies. Student, their conception is something akin to Buddhism. The Buddhists say that the body is like a house. Just as a house is put together with wood, the body is put together with chemicals. And when the body dies, it is just like a house that falls apart. Just as the house becomes simply pieces of wood and then there's no more house, so the body becomes simply chemicals and there's no more body and no more life. Sri Prabhupada. That state is called nirvana. Sri Prabhupada says that state is called nirvana. And then with the ingredients you can build another house or another body. That is Buddhism. The Buddhists do not have any information regarding the soul. He's not wrong there, guys, because emptiness finds itself to be a clear mirror to the enlightened state more than the ideological notions of a sort of transmigrating soul. Anyways, destiny and karma. Let's just read this and I'll end it off here. Student, some scientists argue that there... Oh, wait, that's the student. Student, some scientists argue that there are several souls within each body. They use the earthworm as an example. If you cut in half, both parts will live. They say this proves that two souls occupied the original worm's body. Okay, I don't know what scientists are arguing that, but... Sri Prabhupada, no. It is simply that a new soul has come to occupy the other half of the woman's body, of the worm's body, excuse me. Dr. Singh, it's simply that a new soul has come to occupy the half of the worm's body. So that's what Sri Prabhupada said. Dr. Singh, must the spirit soul necessarily have a body, either spiritual or material? That didn't sound like Dr. Singh. Sri Prabhupada, the soul already has a spiritual body, which the material body covers. My material body grows upon me. My spiritual body, but my material body is unnatural. Whoa. I'll read that again. Sri Prabhupada says, the soul already has a spiritual body, which the material body covers. My material body grows upon me, my spiritual body, but material body is unnatural. The real body is spiritual. I am accepting various bodies that are unnatural to my constitution. My real constitutional position is to be the servant of Krishna. Okay, which I feel the way he's interpreting it is like abiding by a field of intelligence or something. But anyways, he says, as long as I do not come to that position, I remain a servant of matter and get many material bodies according to the laws of material energy. I get one body and then give it up. I desire something else and again get another body. This process is going on under the strict laws of material nature. People think they completely control their desires, but they are always under nature's law of karma. Then he says a passage, like says some lines from the Bhagavad Gita. He says, the bewildered spirit soul, this is like in the Bhagavad Gita. He says, the bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by nature. The source of this bewilderment is that the living entity thinks, I am this body. And then he says some other verse. And he says in the verse, the word yantra or machine means that in any species of life we are traveling in bodies that are like machines provided by material nature. Sometimes we are moving to higher species, sometimes to lower species. But if by the mercy of the spiritual master and Krishna one gets the seed of devotional service and cultivates it, he can become free from the cycle of birth and death. Then his life is successful. Otherwise, he has to travel up and down the different species of life, becoming sometimes a blade of grass, sometimes a lion, and so forth. Whew! Thanks for sticking this out to the end, guys, whoever's listening. This man, of course, he's much more traditional. He was raised in a much more different environment, you know? But this notion of the transmigration of the soul, and if the soul is the attention of the intelligence somehow, then it's as if in his mind, in this dude's mind, the book's called Life Comes from Life. In Sri Prabhupada's mind, he's looking at this world and he's in some sense seeing an evolution of conscious being. And he's saying that in some sense it's the program of nature to endlessly incarnate unless you notice something that is not like a limited pattern of some sorts, I guess. He's saying, like, you see, when the world has a creator, you suddenly don't feel like you have as much value as you did. You know? Your value is in abidance with the collective context. You know, it's like we say the concept is like the life and the context is kind of lifeless. We're in this kind of objective, lifeless kind of space matter world. And at the same time, then the concept, which is the human free will, looking at all this, that's where the life is. That's how we're dictating it. But in certain cultures, and mystical cultures specifically, they began to see the context as the creator rather than the immediate concept of observance. So they began to see their self stretching beyond the limits of objective existence. And to sail over oceans of belief, another way of saying that is kind of like the concept I use of the pilots of consciousness. The pilots of consciousness that notion came to me from the idea of that word Lida, which is a sort of mantra for me personally, at least. And the thing was that the pilot of consciousness is the navigation of attention through various waves and fields of data, in my consideration. That means you're not just here to move your physical body, you're also here to be conscious of how you're navigating this attention that is beaming out of your eyes that is now. Once you revalue this, the world has to, in some sense, update behind your eyes. And sometimes that's the only way you can revalue yourself. Your mind changes before your body, and therefore the center of the wheel of karma has been noticed. The center of the wheel of karma doesn't move. It's the abidance with the singular presence of all phenomena. This abidance is not a relationship of man with some higher entity. It can be if the person likes. But something the Sri Bhagavad Gita also says, that this Sri Prabhupada guy who came to America, and I respect him. I respect his life story. His stories has brought tears to my eyes sometimes. But this man, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it says that any person who worships some sort of demigod, not demigod, like some sort of subcategory god, their intentions and attention will be dictated by that. Their afterlife will be dictated by that god. Okay, in the Srimad Bhagavatam it says this. So pretty much, it's like it's very easy to see one face to all of nature. But why is our face here? That's a bit deeper question. And I believe, like I was having a discussion with my brother about this, where he was kind of really supporting the position of like going into nature and just meditating and kind of leaving the ignorance of the world behind. And my viewpoint was that we cannot think like ancient times because we are the modernity. Our eyes are open to a totally different circumstance in order for us just to follow ancient beliefs like fools who are afraid of the future. You know, for me, it's all data, okay? All the stories I know, they're just various ways data has appeared to me. The true nature of reality, for me, at least personally, it goes on a playful state. It was chaotic for a while, my unconscious. How my known intelligence moved in unknown ways was at first chaotic. It was a sort of struggle of my own personal story. But once you get acquainted with it, you no longer worship synchronicity. You no longer want the world to give you some secret experience so you feel like you mature beyond. You see what is temporary, and you stand as the eternal, and life continues. And the true notion of eternity is an attributeless mover. An attributeless mover. It's a wind. It's as if the collective beings that, in some sense, are alive on this planet, they move like winds in the minds of men through the garb of language. So pretty much, this is hilarious, guys. I feel like this is going to be very entertaining because I can sum up all the knowledge of the human being, and you're going to be like, man, that's arrogant. And I'll be like, okay, but I'm attempting it. And let me tell you how. It has to do with the most, just you in your life. Your knowledge doesn't have to do with what you accumulate. It doesn't have to do with that. It has to do with how you're holding reality. And how you're holding reality comes down to the most immediate subconscious ideological filters. And what that means is you were a certain kid, like when you were when you were younger, you were a certain way. Then you became older, but that way you were as a child has moved into your subconscious. The consciousness is traveling, in some sense. And there can come a superior certainty than just ideological justification. For me, I have nothing against logic and rationality and the sort of advancements we find in secular societies. I find it to be liberating, as if some things that are never in the attention of the person has freed them in a way where it's as if they never had to worry about being in a kind of like caged into a certain ideology. Society, believe it or not, I personally find this whole civilization, it's a sort of costume game. People are dressing themselves up into various ways that they are and they're communicating. So what that means is our society, fundamentally, truth is lost in it because everybody's functioning based on their own truth. So if is there a truth? Is there a truth to all that is? We cannot say, because the linguistic realm that justifies the truth puts it into a sort of story of meaning. It appears for every man differently in accordance to their experiences. There's this story of this warlord. This is a Zen story. And this warlord just comes into power and is like, okay, we're going to kill all the monks. He just doesn't like monks, and he's like, okay, they're a waste of time. They're just eating from taking, like begging from society for food. Let's completely eradicate them, right? And so this warlord gives his command, and his forces begin moving in different villages and destroying the monasteries, and in some sense, but it's kind of strange, right? And so eventually, the warlord gets to a town where one of his generals comes and he says, "We have reached a very important person." Not an important person, but it's like they've reached a monastery that is too much of a heritage site to destroy. Okay? It's like this ancient monastery. And so in this ancient monastery, all the younger disciples, like students of in that monastery, all the younger monks, they ran into the mountains. They were like, "This is chaotic. We have to run into the mountains," right? So they left. But strangely, one old monk not really old, but like, you know, a senior monk, it just stood in front of the thing and was meditating, as if everybody had ran away except this one monk. And so because he was there, right, the army of the warlord suddenly comes there, and suddenly there's this thing where the general goes to the warlord. He says there's this senior monk that is older in age compared to the soldiers, and in some sense, because this is an ancient monastery, like, the soldiers don't want to kill this monk. And so the general looks at it, the warlord looks at his general. He's like, how about you? And he's like, I want you to decide first. And so the warlord is taken by the general, and he sees this monk, this senior monk, kind of in a meditative, graceful meditative position, very quiet and still, as if even though there's an army standing in front of him, he sat on the grass with his eyes closed, and as if there's no army. Now what happens is the army and the entourage of this warlord are there, and the general's even watching. And so it's one of those situations where the warlord gets angry. A rage finds him. He's like, how dare this monk challenge the force I am unleashing on this world? And so the warlord, like the most ruthless, like, conqueror, you know, as if what Genghis Khan inspired to be, this warlord goes, he goes to this and he shouts and he says, monk! And the monk just suddenly, his eyes open. And he says, stand up and come here, like with a hatred, as if he hates the existence of this monk. And so the monk stands up and he comes. The monk is very peaceful. He walks very gently and stands in front of the warlord. And the warlord wants to demonstrate something to his like crew, to kind of increase their eyes of chaos, to open their eyes of chaos. And so what happens is this warlord, he's gripping the handle of his sword with such anger, and he shouts and he says, monk, do you know who I am? I can have my sword in your stomach in an instant. And his hands like trembling with rage. And the monk, strangely, as if he is the elder of the moment, looks at this warlord and smiles, and the whole entourage and the crew and the army is listening. And he says, do you know who I am? There's this intense silence. I can have your sword in my stomach in an instant. And this monk is staring with a smile of contentment in the eyes of this warlord, as if, warlord, you can destroy this form of mine, but you cannot take away the way I am standing. You know? And so the warlord can't kill this man, because this man has nothing to lose. And he realizes the value of certain cultural movements. It's so easy to make someone the enemy and destroy them. It's too easy. That's the issue. Violence is too easy. Any being can be violent. You can give a stick to anyone and they can hit something with it. But the issue is what we have built with the sticks, and in some sense, why we should maintain them. Why there, after 4 billion years, this science project called humanity is here, and people are oblivious, trying to just live for themselves like billionaires. What is that? Is this really the true way our species is functioning? It is 2019. And 2019 is now. And what we can do now can be timeless. That state where fear cannot elude you, where fear cannot give you an illusion to consume. You got to be very mindful of your attention. Your attention and how it is here is the presence of your truth. Life, I don't believe, has to constantly become more complex. Eventually, it finds himself in a sort of simplistic kind of. It's like, you know, there's a reason Leonardo da Vinci said simplicity is the most ultimate sophistication, because all complexity arises from it. So Mr.Within is kind of saying, like, kind of revert to a simpler version of life, observe how the complexity of the problems have emerged. And then you'll eventually function, and the way this life is like we are like caterpillars in disguise. All the kind of sense of memory and all the lifetimes, the past life, the future lives, all the metaphysical notions of this, all of them is like the legs of a caterpillar, but in the moment where the caterpillar is in the cocoon, that metamorphosis cannot be dictated by the past. It is the emergence of the butterfly. It is the emergence of a new reality. So in some way, there is no such thing as death. There is just the emergence of phenomena endlessly in an attention. In an attention that is so divine, it can neither be owned by matter and neither be owned by thought. You're neither a thought, you're neither matter, you're the witness. You are the witness of the living. Ludwig Wittgenstein says the limits of my language are the limits of my world. Mr.Within will kind of add, beyond the limits of your language, you have moved beyond the limits of your world. Language is the thing. Language is the main thing that is administering the values of reality. People, when you see them walk in the streets, it's like what's happening behind their eyes. Various streams of kind of language that are personalizing them in the world is occurring. Oh my God. All right, guys, I feel I can end the talk here unless there's any comments or questions I want to be shared in the chat. In front of our eyes, the world turns in one way. Behind our eyes, the world turns in many ways. Beyond our eyes, not just behind them. Change changes changelessly. A sort of secret of eternity. Sort of kind of like how Plato, his mind was open in a beautiful way. He said time is the moving image of eternity rather than the conqueror of the manifest world. As if time is the body of this supreme attention that is here. Okay. One thing came to my attention to share about this, that relates to this talk in regards to making the unconscious conscious. Um, I spoke about writing, about how the hand can move faster than the mind. The pen in the hand of the person can move faster than the mind. This has to do with the first, the person getting convinced that their body can move in unknown ways, and as their physical reality has the attention of the individual, of the being, has more of a contentment with objective unknown change, then their mind finds a sort of comfort with suddenly supreme subjective change. You see, when people have thoughts throughout the day, that's inferior. Not inferior, you can say like an inferior subjective change. The superior subjective change is a lift off beyond the language threshold. Literally, something in this life has made you see the world beyond the language of its design. And natural states must be respected. That means you got to realize you're on your own solo journey here, on some level, you know. But that's the uniqueness and the privilege of humanity, that we are born alone, but the person does not have to, in some sense, die alone. There's this very incredible saying, this quote that says, when the child is born, the world gracefully laughs and the child cries. But when when the man dies, the world cries and the man laughs gracefully. You are at first a stranger, but then before you leave this reality, you will attain a sort of familiarity that will move you beyond. It has to do with levels of sight, certain levels of sight, certain things, once they come to your awareness, the sort of search for purpose, in some sense, is vanishes. There's a vanishing point towards the search for truth, which is, in some sense, the dissolution or the death of the identity. Sufi traditions and Sufi dervishes would say, in some sense, you must die before you die. And the student was like, what do you mean I gotta die before I die? And the Sufi dervish was like, that means the thoughts of your conviction, the thoughts that are acting as you, the masks you are wearing, you must take off the mask before your face, in some sense, is no more. You must see what is here. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate anybody listening to these talks, and a sort of kind of words that have always found me, which I find the most important kind of rise, mankind, rise.